On the morning of September 11th, 2001, a woman vanished from Lower Manhattan, but her disappearance would become one of the most debated mysteries of that terrible day. Before we dive in, leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we uncover another case that will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. New York City, September 2001. The end of summer. The city was alive with its usual energy. Millions of people going about their daily lives, riding the subways, walking the crowded streets, building careers and families and futures. It was a time of relative peace and prosperity. The new millennium had arrived, and despite the usual anxieties, most people felt optimistic about what lay ahead. Sneha Philip was one of those millions. She was 31 years old, a doctor, an internist, who had trained at some of the best medical institutions in the country. She was beautiful, intelligent, accomplished. She had recently married the love of her life. She had everything to live for. But on the morning of September 11th, 2001, Sneha Philip disappeared. And what happened to her remains one of the most haunting unsolved mysteries connected to that day of tragedy. Was she a victim of the terrorist attacks? One of the nearly 3,000 people who died when the Twin Towers fell? Or did something else happen to her? Something unconnected to the events that changed the world? These questions have haunted her family for more than 2 decades, and the answers remain elusive. This is a story about a woman who vanished on the worst day in American history. A story about a marriage that may not have been what it seemed. A story about secrets, about grief, about the desperate need for answers that may never come. This is the story of Sneha Philip. To understand Sneha Philip's disappearance, you have to understand who she was, the life she had built, and the complexities that lay beneath the surface of her seemingly perfect existence. Sneha Philip was born on August the 6th, 1970 in New York City. Her parents, Ansu and Uma Philip, were immigrants from India who had come to America seeking opportunity and a better life for their family. They found it. Ansu became a successful engineer, and the family settled into a comfortable middle-class existence in Hopewell Junction, a small town in Dutchess County, about 60 miles north of Manhattan. Sneha was the couple's only daughter, and by all accounts, she was exceptional from the start. She was brilliant academically, excelling in school without apparent effort. She was also strikingly beautiful, with dark hair, large expressive eyes, and a smile that could light up a room. But more than her intelligence or her beauty, people remembered her warmth, her kindness, her genuine interest in others. From an early age, Sneha knew she wanted to be a doctor. It was a calling, not just a career choice. She wanted to help people, to heal them, to make a difference in their lives. Her parents supported this dream wholeheartedly, proud of their daughter's ambition and confident in her ability to achieve whatever she set her mind to. Sneha attended the prestigious Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute for her undergraduate degree, then went on to medical school at the American University of the Caribbean. She completed her residency at Harlem Hospital Center and Cabrini Medical Center in Manhattan. By the time she was 30, she was a licensed physician, an internist with a promising career ahead of her. But becoming a doctor hadn't been easy. Sneha had struggled at times, not with the intellectual demands of medical training, but with other challenges. She had failed some licensing exams, before eventually passing them. She had faced disciplinary issues at work. There were whispers of problems, though the details were often vague. Still, by 2001, Sneha seemed to have overcome these difficulties. She was working at Cabrini Medical Center, building her career, living the life she had always wanted, and she had found love. Ron Lieberman was a medical student when he met Sneha. He was Jewish. She was Christian from an Indian family. But despite their different backgrounds, they connected immediately. Ron was kind, stable, devoted. He adored Sneha, saw past whatever difficulties she might have had, and wanted to build a life with her. They married in May 2000, just over a year before her disappearance. The wedding was a celebration of their love, bringing together family and friends from both their worlds. Sneha wore a beautiful white gown. Ron couldn't stop smiling. They seemed, to everyone who witnessed it, like a couple who had found their perfect match. After the wedding, Sneha and Ron moved into an apartment at 140 Battery Park City, a luxury high-rise in Lower Manhattan. The building was modern and elegant, with views of the Hudson River and, from many apartments, the nearby World Trade Center. It was an ideal location for two young professionals building their careers in the city. For the next year and a half, Sneha and Ron lived what appeared to be a happy life. They both worked long hours in medicine, but they found time for each other, for dinners out, for walks along the waterfront, for the simple pleasures of married life. Ron would later describe this period as the happiest of his life. But beneath the surface, things were not as perfect as they seemed. Sneha had secrets, and those secrets would become central to the mystery of her disappearance. The day before Sneha Philip vanished was September 10th, 2001. It was a Monday, an ordinary day in many ways, but one that would later be scrutinized in extraordinary detail. Sneha had the day off from work. Ron, her husband, left for his job at Jacobi Medical Center in the Bronx early that morning. He wouldn't see Sneha again. What Sneha did that day has been partially reconstructed from receipts, surveillance footage, and witness accounts. But much remains unknown, and what is known raises more questions than it answers. At some point during the day, Sneha went shopping. She visited several stores in Lower Manhattan, including a Century 21 department store near the World Trade Center. She bought bedding, linens, and other household items. The purchases were documented on receipts found later in the apartment, but she didn't shop alone. Store surveillance footage showed Sneha in the company of an unidentified woman. The two appeared to be friendly, comfortable with each other. They browsed together, chatted, seemed like friends, or at least acquaintances. Who was this woman? Investigators never identified her. She has never come forward. Her identity remains one of the many mysteries surrounding Sneha's last known day. After shopping, Sneha returned to her apartment building at some point in the afternoon or evening. Building surveillance cameras captured her entering 140 Battery Park City around 7 p.m. on September 10th. She was carrying her shopping bags. And then she disappeared from the building's cameras. The next time she should have appeared on surveillance footage, she didn't. She wasn't seen leaving through the lobby. She wasn't seen in the elevators. She simply vanished. Ron came home from work late that evening, around 11 p.m. He expected to find Sneha in the apartment. Instead, he found it empty. The shopping bags from her day's purchases were there, but Sneha wasn't. Ron wasn't immediately alarmed. Sneha sometimes went out in the evenings. She had friends, She had her own life. He assumed she would be back soon. He went to bed. When he woke up on the morning of September 11th, Sneha still wasn't home. Now Ron was worried. It wasn't like her to stay out all night without calling. He tried her cell phone. No answer. He waited, hoping she would walk through the door with an explanation. And then, at 8:46 a.m., the world changed. American Airlines Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center, just blocks from Ron and Sneha's apartment. Ron, like millions of others, watched in horror as the events unfolded. At 9:03 a.m., United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. The city was under attack. In the chaos and terror of that morning, Ron's concern for his missing wife took on a new dimension. Where was Sneha? Was she somewhere in the neighborhood when the planes hit? Was she near the towers? Was she inside them? The South Tower collapsed at 9:59 a.m. The North Tower fell at 10:28 a.m. Nearly 3,000 people died that day, their bodies buried under millions of tons of rubble. Many were never recovered, many were never identified, and Sneha Philip was among the missing. The days and weeks after September 11th were a nightmare for everyone in New York, but especially for those with missing loved ones. The city was covered in ash and grief. Families posted flyers with photos of the missing, desperately hoping for news. Morgues and hospitals were overwhelmed. The search for survivors, and then for remains, continued around the clock. Ron Lieberman was among those desperate for answers. He filed a missing person report. He contacted hospitals, morgues, anyone who might have information. He searched the lists of survivors and victims, hoping to find Sneha's name, dreading what he might learn. Sneha's parents, Ansu and Uma Philip, came to the city to help search for their daughter. They walked the streets of Lower Manhattan, showed her photo to strangers, posted flyers on every available surface. Like thousands of other families, they refused to give up hope. But no trace of Sneha was found. She wasn't among the injured in hospitals. She wasn't among the identified dead. She wasn't among those who showed up, dazed and confused, having survived the collapse. She had simply vanished. The question that haunted everyone was what happened to Sneha Philip. There were essentially two possibilities. Either she had died in the September 11th attacks, one of the nearly 3,000 victims of that terrible day, or something else had happened to her, something unconnected to the terrorist attacks, something that had caused her to disappear on the night of September 10th, or the early morning hours of September 11th. The first possibility seemed, on its surface, the most likely. Sneha lived just blocks from the World Trade Center. If she had left her apartment on the morning of September 11th, she could easily have been in the vicinity when the planes hit. She was a doctor. If she had seen the attacks, she might have rushed to help, might have been inside or near the towers when they collapsed. But there were problems with this theory. There was no evidence that Sneha had left her apartment on the morning of September 11th. The building's surveillance cameras, which had captured her entering on September 10th, didn't show her leaving on September 11th. Of course, the cameras might have missed her. The chaos of the day might have caused gaps in the footage. But it was troubling. More troubling was the fact that Sneha hadn't been home when Ron went to bed on the night of September 10th. Where had she gone after entering the building at 7 p.m.? Why hadn't she come home that night? These questions suggested that something had happened to Sneha before the attacks even began. The second possibility, that Sneha had disappeared for reasons unrelated to September 11th, opened up a much darker set of questions. Had she been the victim of a crime? Had she left voluntarily, abandoning her life for some reason? Had something been going on in her life that no one knew about? As investigators began to look more closely at Sneha Philip's life, they discovered that the picture was more complicated than it had first appeared. The accomplished doctor, the happy newlywed, had secrets that would change how everyone understood her disappearance. The investigation into Sneha Philip's disappearance revealed a woman whose life was far more complicated than her family and husband had known, or at least had acknowledged. The first troubling revelation involved Sneha's career. In the months before her disappearance, Sneha had been facing serious professional problems. She had been suspended from her position at Cabrini Medical Center. The reasons were not entirely clear, but there were allegations of alcohol abuse and inappropriate behavior. According to hospital records and testimony from colleagues, Sneha had been struggling for some time. There had been incidents where she showed up to work appearing intoxicated. There had been complaints from patients and staff about her behavior. The hospital had tried to work with her, offering counseling and support, but the problems persisted. The suspension had come in August 2001, just weeks before her disappearance. She was told that she would need to appear before a medical review board to address the allegations against her. Her medical license, her career, everything she had worked for, was potentially at stake. On September 10, 2001, the day before the attacks, Sneha was scheduled to appear before a medical board to address these allegations, but the hearing never took place. The events of September 11th intervened, and by the time the chaos subsided, Sneha was gone. This professional crisis casts a new light on Sneha's disappearance. She wasn't simply a successful doctor living a happy life. She was a woman whose career was falling apart, who faced the possibility of losing everything she had worked for, who was under enormous stress and pressure. But the professional problems were just the beginning. Investigators also discovered that Sneha had been leading something of a double life. Ron Lieberman, Sneha's husband, was aware of some of his wife's struggles. He knew about the issues at work. He had supported her through difficult times. But there were things he didn't know, or at least things he later claimed not to have known. The investigation into Sneha's activities in the months before her disappearance painted a picture of a woman who was exploring aspects of her identity that she had kept hidden from her family. Private investigators, hired by various parties, compiled a dossier of her movements and associations. Sneha had been spending time in lesbian bars in Greenwich Village. She had been seen at these establishments multiple times, sometimes alone, sometimes with other women. Witnesses described her as a regular, someone who seemed comfortable in these spaces, someone who appeared to be exploring her sexuality. The bars she frequented were well known in the LGBTQ community. They were places where people went to meet others, to explore their identities, to escape the constraints of their everyday lives. For Sneha, a woman from a conservative Indian family, married to a man, these bars represented a secret world that existed parallel to her public life. This revelation shocked many who knew Sneha. She had never spoken openly about being attracted to women. Her marriage to Ron seemed loving and genuine. but the evidence suggested that Sneha was questioning her sexuality, or perhaps acting on attractions she had long suppressed. Several witnesses from these bars came forward during the investigation. They remembered Sneha, recognized her from photographs. They described her as friendly, but somewhat reserved, as someone who seemed to be figuring things out, as someone who was clearly struggling with questions about her identity. One bartender recalled that Sneha had been in her establishment several times in the weeks before September 11th. She remembered Sneha talking to various women, seeming to be looking for connection, seeming lost in some way that was hard to articulate. The unidentified woman seen with Sneha in the surveillance footage from September 10th took on new significance in light of these revelations. Was she a friend? A lover? Someone Sneha had met at the bars she frequented? The woman's identity remained unknown, but her presence suggested that Sneha had relationships and connections that her family and husband knew nothing about. Private investigators spent considerable time trying to identify this woman. They showed the surveillance footage to regulars at the bars Sneha frequented. They canvassed the stores where Sneha had shopped. They posted the woman's image online, hoping someone would recognize her. But despite these efforts, the woman was never identified. She has never come forward, never contacted authorities, never offered any explanation of her relationship with Sneha. Her silence has fueled speculation about whether she knows something about what happened, whether she might hold the key to solving the mystery. There were other troubling details as well. Sneha had a history of alcohol abuse that was more serious than many people realized. She had been arrested in 2000 for assault, after allegedly attacking her husband's ex-girlfriend in a drunken rage. The charges had been dropped, but the incident suggested a volatile side to Sneha's personality that didn't fit the image of the composed professional doctor. The details of this assault were disturbing. According to police reports, Sneha had confronted the ex-girlfriend at a party, accusing her of trying to rekindle a relationship with Ron. Words were exchanged, and then Sneha allegedly attacked, scratching and hitting the other woman. It took several people to pull her off. The charges were eventually dropped when the victim decided not to pursue the case. But the incident remained in the police records, a red flag that suggested Sneha was capable of violence when drunk, that she had issues with jealousy and impulse control, that there were darker aspects to her personality. Friends and colleagues painted a complex picture of Sneha. Some remembered her as warm, caring, brilliant, a gifted doctor who truly cared about her, patience. Others recalled mood swings, erratic behavior, periods of withdrawal, when she would become unreachable. She was not an easy person to know, they said. She kept parts of herself hidden, even from those closest to her. Several colleagues described a pattern of behavior that suggested Sneha was dealing with significant personal issues. She would be fine for weeks or months, performing well at work, seeming happy and engaged. And then something would shift. She would become distant, irritable, prone to making mistakes. These dark periods would eventually pass, but they were concerning. One friend, who asked to remain anonymous, described Sneha as someone who was at war with herself. She seemed to want different things that couldn't coexist. She wanted to be the perfect doctor, the perfect daughter, the perfect wife. But she also had other needs, other desires, other aspects of herself that didn't fit into that perfect picture. This internal conflict This sense of Sneha being pulled in different directions might explain some of her erratic behavior. She was trying to be too many things at once, trying to meet expectations that were impossible to reconcile, trying to suppress parts of herself that refused to stay suppressed. Ron Lieberman insisted that despite these complexities, his marriage to Sneha had been happy. He acknowledged the problems, the professional issues, the incident with his ex-girlfriend. But he said they had worked through these things together, that their love was strong, that he had no reason to believe Sneha would leave him or harm herself. In interviews, Ron has presented himself as a devoted husband who was blindsided by his wife's disappearance and by the revelations that followed. He has said that he knew Sneha had struggles, that he tried to support her, that he loved her unconditionally. But some have questioned how much Ron really knew about his wife's secret life. Did he know about the bars? Did he know about the women? Did he know about the extent of her drinking? These questions have never been fully answered. Ron has maintained that he was unaware of these aspects of Sneha's life. But some investigators have been skeptical. Sneha's parents similarly rejected any suggestion that their daughter might have disappeared voluntarily or come to harm through her own actions. They insisted she was a victim of September 11th, that she had rushed to help after the attacks and had died doing what doctors do, trying to save lives. The Philips have been unwavering in this belief. They have rejected every alternative theory, dismissed every piece of evidence that might suggest otherwise. For them, the only acceptable narrative is one in which their daughter died a hero. This certainty is understandable. What parent could accept that their child disappeared voluntarily, or was murdered, or took her own life? The September 11th narrative provides comfort. It gives meaning to Sneha's death. It allows the family to grieve without shame or guilt. But investigators were not so sure. The timeline didn't add up. Sneha had been missing since the night of September 10th. She hadn't been home when Ron went to bed. She hadn't been captured on surveillance cameras leaving the building on September 11th. Whatever happened to her, it seemed to have happened before the attacks. This is where the mystery of Sneha Philip becomes truly confounding. If she didn't die in the September 11th attacks, what happened to her? And if she did die in the attacks, why was she missing from her apartment all night before they occurred? The theories about what happened to Sneha Philip fall into several categories, and each has its supporters and its problems. The first theory, and the one her family has always maintained, is that Sneha was a victim of the September 11th attacks. According to this theory, Sneha left her apartment building early on the morning of September 11th, before the attacks began. She went for a walk, or to get coffee, or perhaps to clear her head before her scheduled hearing with the medical board. When the first plane hit the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., Sneha was in the vicinity. As a doctor, her instinct was to help. She rushed toward the towers, not away from them. She was inside one of the buildings, or in the plaza, or on the street nearby when they collapsed. She died trying to save lives, a hero. This theory is comforting in some ways. It gives meaning to Sneha's death. It explains her disappearance as an act of selflessness, rather than something darker. And it's not impossible. Many people died on September 11th, whose presence in the area couldn't be fully explained. Supporters of this theory point to several factors. First, Sneha was a doctor, It would have been in character for her to rush to help in an emergency. Second, she lived just blocks from the World Trade Center. She would have had easy access to the scene. Third, thousands of people died that day whose bodies were never recovered or identified. It's entirely possible that Sneha was among them. The family has also pointed to Sneha's character. She was compassionate, caring, dedicated to helping others. The idea that she would run toward danger to help strangers fits with who she was. The idea that she died a hero is consistent with the values she lived by. But there are significant problems with this theory. The biggest is the surveillance footage. Sneha was captured entering her building on September 10th, but was never captured leaving. The building had cameras at all exits. While it's possible the cameras missed her, it seems unlikely. Investigators examined the surveillance system carefully. The cameras were functioning on the morning of September 11th. They captured other residents leaving the building in the chaos after the attacks. But they did not capture Sneha. Either she found a way to leave without being recorded, or she never left at all. There's also the question of what Sneha was doing all night. If she entered her building at 7 p.m. and didn't come home until she left early on September 11th, where was she? The building had common areas, a gym, a roof deck. Could she have spent the entire night in the building but outside her apartment? It seems strange. Some have suggested that Sneha might have left the building with someone else, perhaps a neighbor or building staff, in a way that didn't register clearly on the cameras, or that she might have left through an emergency exit that wasn't covered by surveillance. These explanations are possible, but unverified. The second theory is that Sneha died on the night of September 10th, before the attacks. According to this theory, something happened to Sneha after she entered her building that evening. She was murdered, either by someone in the building or by someone she let in. Her body was disposed of in a way that prevented its discovery. September 11th, in this theory, was a coincidence, a terrible twist of fate that complicated the investigation and provided cover for whoever killed her. The chaos of that day, the destruction of evidence, the overwhelming focus on the terrorist attacks, all of it made it easier for her killer to escape justice. This theory has some support. Sneha's troubled personal life, her possible involvement with unknown individuals, her presence in bars where she might have met dangerous people, all of these factors suggest vulnerability. And her disappearance on the night before September 11th, rather than during the attacks themselves, points to something happening before that terrible morning. The fact that Sneha had been receiving unwanted attention from various sources was also noted by investigators. Her exploration of the gay bar scene had apparently attracted interest from people her family and husband didn't know. She might have made connections that turned dangerous. Some investigators focused on the possibility that Sneha had arranged to meet someone on the night of September 10th. Perhaps she left her apartment after entering at 7 p.m., met this person somewhere, and never returned. The person might have killed her, disposed of her body, and then been protected by the chaos that followed the next morning. But there are problems with this theory too. No body was ever found. No evidence of foul play was ever discovered in her apartment or building. No witnesses reported anything suspicious, and no suspect was ever identified. The building was examined thoroughly in the days and weeks after Sneha's disappearance was reported. Police searched common areas, storage rooms, the roof. They found nothing. If Sneha was killed in the building, her body was removed without anyone noticing. The third theory is that Sneha disappeared voluntarily. According to this theory, Sneha was overwhelmed by the problems in her life. Her career was in jeopardy. Her marriage was troubled by secrets she was keeping. Her identity was in flux. She decided to walk away from everything, to start a new life somewhere else. September 11th, again, was either coincidence or opportunity. The attacks created massive chaos and confusion. Thousands of people were displaced, relocated, lost. It would have been easier than usual for someone to disappear, to assume a new identity, to start over without being found. This theory would explain some of the mysteries in the case. It would explain why Sneha wasn't captured on camera, leaving the building on September 11th, because she might have left earlier, before anyone was paying attention. It would explain why her body was never found, because she wasn't dead. It would explain the lack of forensic evidence, because there was no crime. Some have pointed to Sneha's behavior in the weeks before her disappearance as potential evidence of planning. She had been buying household items, perhaps preparing for a new life somewhere. She had been spending time in spaces where her family couldn't find her. She had been building connections outside her marriage. This theory is the hardest for Sneha's family to accept. It suggests that she abandoned them, that she's been alive all these years without making contact. It suggests a selfishness and cruelty that those who loved her find impossible to believe, and there's little evidence to support it. Sneha never accessed her bank accounts after September 10th. She never used her credit cards. Her social security number never appeared in any records. If she started a new life, she did so without leaving any trace, which is extremely difficult to accomplish. In the decades since her disappearance, there have been no confirmed sightings of Sneha. No one matching her description has been found living under another name. If she's alive, she has managed to stay completely hidden, which seems almost impossible in the modern world of digital records and surveillance. The fourth theory is that Sneha died by suicide. According to this theory, the pressures in her life became too much to bear. Her career was falling apart. Her personal life was complicated by secrets and perhaps shame. She decided to end her life, and she did so on the night of September 10th or the early morning of September 11th. The timing, again, could be coincidence or could be significant. Perhaps the approaching medical board hearing, scheduled for September 11th, was the final straw. Perhaps she chose that night, knowing what was coming, unable to face it. Several factors support this theory. Sneha was under enormous pressure professionally. She was hiding significant aspects of her identity from her family and husband. She had a history of alcohol abuse, which is often associated with depression and suicidal thoughts. She may have felt trapped, with no way out. If Sneha took her own life, she might have done so in a way that prevented her body from being found. She might have jumped from the roof of her building into the Hudson River. She might have walked into the water somewhere along the waterfront. She might have found some other way to disappear. This theory is also painful for Sneha's family. It suggests mental illness, despair, a failure of the support systems that should have helped her. Her family has rejected it, insisting that Sneha was not suicidal, that she had plans for the future. that she would not have taken her own life, but depression and suicidal ideation are often hidden, even from those closest to the sufferer. Sneha's struggles with alcohol, her professional problems, her possible confusion about her sexuality. All of these could have contributed to a mental state that her family wasn't aware of. People contemplating suicide often go to great lengths to hide their intentions. They may seem fine, even happy, in the days before they act. They may make plans for the future that they have no intention of following through on. The absence of obvious warning signs doesn't mean suicide can be ruled out. Each of these theories has its advocates. Each has evidence in its favor and evidence against it. And after more than 2 decades, none of them has been proven or definitively ruled out. The investigation into Sneha's disappearance was complicated by the events of September 11th in ways that went beyond the obvious. The NYPD was overwhelmed, dealing with the aftermath of the worst terrorist attack in American history. Resources that might have been devoted to a missing persons case were instead devoted to rescue and recovery efforts, to security concerns, to the massive investigation into the attacks themselves. Sneha's case did not receive the immediate attention it might have under normal circumstances. By the time investigators could focus on her disappearance, critical time had passed. Evidence had degraded. Memories had faded. Witnesses had scattered. The physical evidence in the case was also affected. Lower Manhattan was covered in dust and debris. Buildings had been damaged. Records had been destroyed. The normal forensic examination of Sneha's apartment and movements was hampered by the extraordinary conditions that prevailed in the weeks after September 11th. Despite these obstacles, investigators did pursue the case. They interviewed Ron and Sneha's family extensively. They tracked down co-workers, friends, and acquaintances. They examined surveillance footage, financial records, and phone records. They tried to piece together Sneha's movements and state of mind in the days before her disappearance, but they were never able to determine what happened to her. The case went cold, becoming one of thousands of unresolved missing persons cases in New York City, distinguished only by its connection to September 11th. The legal battle over Sneha Philip's fate was almost as contentious as the investigation itself. In the aftermath of September 11th, the families of victims were entitled to compensation from a fund established to help them. The September 11th Victim Compensation Fund was created by Congress to provide financial assistance to those who lost loved ones in the attacks. But to receive this compensation, the victims had to be officially recognized as having died in the attacks. Sneha's family wanted her to be declared a victim of September 11th. Ron Lieberman, her husband, supported this. They believed she had died trying to help others, that she deserved to be remembered as a hero, that her name should be included among those lost that day. The family submitted extensive documentation to support their claim. They provided evidence of Sneha's character, her dedication to medicine, her compassion for others. They argued that it was in character for her to rush to help in an emergency. They pointed to her proximity to the World Trade Center and the absence of any evidence that she was alive. But the fund's administrators were not convinced. They looked at the evidence. They saw that Sneha had been missing since the night of September 10th. They saw that there was no proof she had been in or near the towers on September 11th. They saw the surveillance footage showing her entering but not leaving her building. They concluded that she could not be presumed a victim of the attacks. The initial denial was a blow to the family. They had expected their claim to be accepted. Instead, they were being told that their daughter's death would not be recognized, that she would not receive the same acknowledgement as other victims, that her story was somehow different. The family appealed. The case went to court, and in a series of hearings that stretched over several years, judges heard arguments about what had happened to Sneha Philip. The legal proceedings were emotionally charged. The family's attorneys argued passionately that Sneha deserved to be recognized as a victim. They presented character witnesses who testified to her compassion and dedication. They argued that the circumstantial evidence pointed toward her being at the World Trade Center. The fund's attorneys argued that the evidence was insufficient. They pointed to the timeline, the surveillance footage, the unanswered questions about Sneha's activities on the night of September 10th. They argued that including her among the victims would set a precedent that could lead to fraudulent claims. The case attracted significant media attention. Sneha's story was featured in newspapers and magazines, on television news programs, in documentary films. The public was fascinated by the mystery of her disappearance, by the complexity of her life, by the question of whether she was a hero or something else entirely. In 2004, a judge ruled that Sneha was not a victim of September 11th. The judge found that the evidence did not support the conclusion that she had died in the attacks. The timing of her disappearance, the lack of evidence that she had been in the area, the surveillance footage showing her entering but not leaving her building, all of these factors weighed against the family's claim. The judge's ruling was detailed and carefully reasoned. It acknowledged the uncertainty in the case while concluding that the evidence did not meet the legal standard for inclusion among the victims. The judge expressed sympathy for the family, but said the law required a finding based on evidence, not on sympathy or hope. The ruling was devastating for Sneha's family. They had lost their daughter, their sister, their wife, and now they were being told that her death would not be recognized, that she would not be counted among the victims, that her name would not be inscribed on the memorial. The family's reaction was one of grief and anger. They felt they were being victimized twice, first by whatever had happened to Sneha, and now by a legal system that refused to acknowledge her death. They vowed to continue fighting. The family appealed again. The case went back through the court system. New evidence was presented. New arguments were made. The legal battle dragged on for years, a painful parallel to the family's ongoing grief. And in 2008, after years of legal wrangling, they finally prevailed. An appellate court ruled that Sneha could be presumed a victim of September 11th. The court acknowledged the uncertainties in the case, but concluded that it was more likely than not that she had died in the attacks. The key to the ruling was a legal concept called the presumption of life. Under this presumption, a missing person is assumed to be alive, unless there is evidence of death. But the presumption can be overcome if the circumstances suggest that death is more likely than continued life. The court engaged in a detailed analysis of the evidence. It noted that Sneha had never accessed her bank accounts after September 10th. She had never used her credit cards. Her social security number had never appeared in any employment or financial records. she had never contacted her family or friends. She had completely vanished. The court found that Sneha's circumstances overcame the presumption of life. She had never accessed her bank accounts, never used her credit cards, never contacted her family or friends. She had no history of attempting to disappear. If she were alive, the court reasoned, there would have been some sign of her in the more than 6 years since her disappearance. And given that she lived near the World Trade Center, and given that she was a doctor who would have been inclined to help in an emergency, the court concluded that it was reasonable to presume she had died in the attacks. The appellate court's ruling was a triumph for the family. It vindicated their belief that Sneha had died on September 11th. It entitled them to compensation from the fund, and most importantly, it meant that Sneha's name would be included among the official victims of the attacks. Sneha's name was added to the list of September 11th victims. Her family received compensation from the fund. And, most importantly to them, she would be remembered as part of that terrible day, her name inscribed on the memorial at Ground Zero. The memorial at the National September 11th Memorial and Museum includes the names of all 2,977 people killed in the attacks on September 11, 2001, and the 6 people killed in the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. The names are arranged around the edges of 2 reflecting pools that occupy the footprints of the original Twin Towers. Sneha and Philip's name is there, etched in bronze, along with the nearly 3,000 others. For her family, this recognition is profoundly important. It means she is remembered. It means her death has meaning. It means she is part of the collective memory of that terrible day. But the legal ruling did not end the debate. Many people, including some investigators, continued to believe that Sneha's disappearance had nothing to do with September 11th. The court had made a legal determination, not a factual one. The mystery of what happened to Sneha Philip remained unsolved. Critics of the ruling argued that it was based on emotion rather than evidence. They pointed out that the court had not determined what actually happened to Sneha, only that it was legally permissible to presume she had died in the attacks. This was a very different thing from proving she had been there. Some suggested that the ruling set a dangerous precedent. If anyone who disappeared around the time of September 11th could be presumed a victim, how would fraudulent claims be prevented? How would the integrity of the victims' list be maintained? Others argued that the ruling was appropriate given the unique circumstances of September 11th. Thousands of people died that day. Many bodies were never recovered. Many victims could not be conclusively identified. In such circumstances, a degree of flexibility was necessary. The debate continues to this day. Sneha's name is on the memorial, but her story remains contested. She is officially a victim of September 11th, but what actually happened to her remains unknown. Ron Lieberman, Sneha's husband, has spent more than 2 decades living with the mystery of her disappearance. In interviews over the years, he has spoken about the toll it has taken on him, the difficulty of grieving without closure, the endless questions that have no answers. Ron has always maintained that Sneha was a victim of September 11th. He believes she left the apartment building early that morning, that she rushed to help when the attacks began, that she died doing what she was trained to do. He rejects any suggestion that she was murdered, that she disappeared voluntarily, that she took her own life. At the same time, Ron has been forced to confront uncomfortable truths about his wife. He has had to process the revelations about her secret life, her visits to lesbian bars, her possible affairs. He has had to reconcile the woman he thought he knew with the woman who emerged from the investigation. In interviews, Ron has been remarkably candid about this process. He has acknowledged that his marriage was more complicated than he realized. He has admitted that Sneha kept secrets from him, but he has also insisted that their love was real, that whatever she was going through, they would have worked through it together if she had lived. Ron eventually remarried and has tried to build a new life. But he has never stopped thinking about Sneha, never stopped wondering what happened to her, never stopped hoping that someday, somehow, he might find out the truth. Sneha's parents, Ansu and Uma Philip, have been equally devoted to their daughter's memory. They have never accepted any theory of her disappearance other than that she died on September 11th. They have fought legal battles, given interviews, done everything they could to ensure that Sneha is remembered as a victim of the attacks. For them, the alternative explanations are simply unthinkable. The idea that their daughter was murdered, or disappeared voluntarily, or took her own life, these possibilities are too painful to contemplate. September 11th, as terrible as it was, at least provides a narrative they can live with, a story of heroism and sacrifice rather than something darker. Whether this narrative is true is something only Sneha herself could tell us, and she has been silent for more than 22 years. The mystery of Sneha Philip has fascinated journalists, true crime enthusiasts, and amateur investigators for decades. Her case has been featured in documentaries, podcasts, magazine articles, and countless online discussions. It is one of the most debated, unsolved cases connected to September 11th. What makes the case so compelling is the perfect ambiguity at its center. There is no definitive evidence of what happened to Sneha. Each theory can be supported and challenged with the available facts. The truth remains tantalizingly out of reach. Some investigators believe the answer lies with the unidentified woman seen shopping with Sneha on September 10th. If this woman could be found and interviewed, she might be able to shed light on Sneha's state of mind, her plans, her secrets. But despite extensive efforts, the woman has never been identified. Others believe the answer lies in Sneha's secret life. The lesbian bars, the possible affairs, the hidden aspects of her sexuality, these suggest a world that was never fully explored by investigators. Perhaps someone in that world knows what happened. Perhaps Sneha confided in someone who has never come forward. Still others believe the answer lies in the chaos of September 11th itself. Thousands of people died that day. Not all of them were in the towers. Some were on the streets, in nearby buildings, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Perhaps Sneha was simply one of them, her body never recovered, her presence never documented. The 9/11 Memorial in New York includes the names of all the officially recognized victims of the attacks. Sneha Ann Philip's name is there, among the nearly 3,000 others. For her family, this recognition is profoundly important. It means she is remembered. It means her death has meaning. It means she is part of the collective memory of that terrible day. But for those who believe she died before the attacks, the inclusion of her name is troubling. It represents, in their view, a fiction, a false narrative that obscures the truth of what happened to her. They believe Sneha deserves justice, not just remembrance, and that justice requires finding out how she really died. The passage of time has made solving Sneha's case increasingly difficult. Memories fade, evidence degrades, witnesses die or become unreachable. The further we get from September 2001, the less likely it becomes that the truth will ever emerge. But the case refuses to die. Every few years, a new article or documentary brings renewed attention. Tips come in, though none have led anywhere. The mystery persists, a puzzle that seems destined to remain unsolved. What can we say with certainty about Sneha Philip? We know she was a complex woman, more complex than the simple narrative of accomplished doctor and happy newlywed might suggest. We know she was struggling professionally and perhaps personally. We know she had secrets. We know she vanished on or around September 11th, 2001. And we know she has never been seen or heard from since. Beyond these facts, everything is speculation. She might have died a hero, rushing to help strangers in their moment of need. She might have been murdered, the victim of someone who has never been brought to justice. She might have taken her own life, overwhelmed by pressures no one fully understood. She might, against all odds, still be alive somewhere, living a life unknown to those who loved her. Each of these possibilities has profound implications. Each tells a different story about who Sneha was and what her life meant. And each leaves those who loved her with different kinds of grief, different kinds of questions, different kinds of pain. For Ron Lieberman, the most painful aspect of Sneha's disappearance has been the uncertainty. He has said that he could accept any answer, even the most terrible one, if only he could know for sure. The not knowing, the endless speculation, the inability to grieve with finality, this is what has been hardest to bear. This is a common experience among families of missing persons. The absence of closure creates a wound that cannot heal. The mind keeps returning to the mystery, keeps generating theories and possibilities, keeps hoping for resolution. It is a form of torture that only those who have experienced it can fully understand. Sneha's parents have dealt with the uncertainty by choosing to believe in the narrative that provides them the most comfort. They believe their daughter died on September 11th, that she died trying to help others, that she died a hero. This belief may or may not be true, but it has allowed them to grieve, to honor her memory, to find some measure of peace. There is wisdom in this approach. When the truth cannot be known, we must choose the story that allows us to live. The Philips have chosen a story of heroism and sacrifice. Whether it is the true story of Sneha's death, only she could say. The broader context of September 11th has shaped how Sneha's case is perceived and remembered. On any other day, the disappearance of a young doctor from Lower Manhattan would have been a major news story. It would have been investigated intensively. Resources would have been devoted to finding her. But September 11th was not any other day. Thousands of people were missing. The city was in crisis. The nation was at war. In that context, one missing woman, however tragic, could not command the same attention that it otherwise would have. Some have argued that this context allowed the truth about Sneha's disappearance to be obscured. If she was murdered, the chaos of September 11th provided perfect cover for the killer. If she disappeared voluntarily, the confusion of that time made it easier to vanish. If she took her own life, the overwhelming tragedy of the day overshadowed her individual despair. Others argue that the context of September 11th is precisely why Sneha should be remembered as a victim of the attacks. She lived in the shadow of the World Trade Center. She was a doctor who would have rushed to help. The simplest explanation, that she died along with thousands of others, should be accepted even if it cannot be proven beyond doubt. This tension between the desire for truth and the need for closure runs through every aspect of Sneha's case. Her family chose closure. Investigators sought truth. And after more than 2 decades, neither has been fully achieved. What would Sneha Philip want? This is a question that haunts everyone who has studied her case. Would she want the investigation to continue, the truth to be pursued at any cost? Or would she want her family to have peace, to accept a narrative that allows them to grieve and move on? We cannot know the answer. Sneha never had the chance to tell us what she wanted. She vanished before she could resolve the conflicts in her life, before she could face the challenges ahead, before she could decide who she truly was and who she wanted to be. In some ways, Sneha Philip died at a moment of transition. She was facing a professional crisis that might have ended or transformed her career. She was exploring aspects of her sexuality that might have changed her marriage. She was struggling with issues that might have led to growth or collapse. We will never know which path she would have taken. We will never know who she would have become. September 11th, 2001, froze her in time, leaving us only with questions and fragments and the haunting image of a woman who entered a building and was never seen again. The case of Sneha Philip reminds us that even amid the greatest tragedies, individual stories matter. Nearly 3,000 people died on September 11th. Each of them was a person with a life, a history, hopes and fears, and secrets. Each of them left behind people who loved them and who now must live with their absence. Sneha was one of those people. Whether she died that day or the night before, whether she died a hero or a victim of something else entirely, she was a human being whose life was cut short. She deserved better than the fate she received, whatever that fate was. Her story also reminds us of the limits of knowledge. Some mysteries are never solved. Some questions are never answered. We want to believe that the truth always comes out, that justice is always served, that we can always find out what happened. But reality is not so accommodating. Sometimes the truth remains hidden. Sometimes the mystery endures. For Sneha's family, for Ron, for everyone who knew and loved her, this is the hardest part. They have had to learn to live with uncertainty, to function without closure, to carry on even though a fundamental question remains unanswered. That they have managed to do so is a testament to human resilience. Life continues, even after the worst losses. People find ways to cope, to heal, to build new lives while still honoring those they have lost. The Phillips and Ron Lieberman have done this. They have kept Sneha's memory alive, while also finding ways to move forward. This is perhaps the only victory that can be claimed in a case like this. Not the victory of solved mysteries or answered questions, but the smaller, quieter of victory, of continuing to live, to love, to hope, even in the face of permanent uncertainty. Sneha Ann Philip was 31 years old when she disappeared. She would be in her mid-50s today if she were still alive. Her parents, now elderly, have spent more than 2 decades without their daughter. Ron has built a new life, but a part of him remains in that apartment in Battery Park City, waiting for Sneha to come home. The September 11th memorial includes her name among the victims. Each year, on the anniversary of the attacks, her name is read aloud along with the others. For those few moments, she is remembered, honored, mourned, and then the list moves on to the next name and the next, and the thousands who died that day. But for those who study her case, who wonder about the truth, who refuse to accept the convenient narrative, Sneha Philip is more than a name on a memorial. She is a mystery, a puzzle, a question that demands an answer, even if none is forthcoming. What happened to Sneha Philip? Where did she go after entering her building on the evening of September 10th, 2001? What was she doing all night? Where was she when the planes hit the towers the next morning? How did she die? And when? And why? These questions remain unanswered. And unless new evidence emerges, unless someone comes forward with information, unless some unexpected breakthroughs occurs, they may remain unanswered forever. That is the final, irresolvable mystery of Sneha Philip. A woman who lived, who loved, who struggled, who vanished. A woman whose fate was swallowed by the greatest tragedy of our time. A woman who is remembered, but not understood. Mourned, but not found. A permanent question mark in the story of September 11th. If you have any information about the disappearance of Sneha and Philip, please contact the New York Police Department or the FBI. Even after more than 2 decades, any information could be valuable. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share this video to keep Sneha's story alive and to honor the memory of all those lost on September 11th, 2001. The mystery of Sneha and Philip remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases connected to that terrible day. More than 2 decades have passed since she walked into her apartment building on the evening of September 10th, 2001, and vanished from history. In that time, the world has changed in countless ways. The war on terror reshaped global politics. New York City rebuilt and transformed. A new generation has grown up with no memory of the attacks. The immediate trauma of September 11th has faded, replaced by historical memory and annual remembrance. But for those who knew and loved Sneha, the mystery remains as painful as ever. Ron Lieberman has had to build a new life, while never knowing what happened to his first wife. Sneha's parents have grown old without their daughter, without the grandchildren she might have given them, without the closure that would allow them to fully grieve. The case has been examined and re-examined by journalists, investigators, and amateur sleuths. New theories have been proposed. Old evidence has been reconsidered. But no definitive answer has emerged. The mystery endures. What makes Sneha's case so compelling is not just the unanswered questions, but what those questions reveal about the limits of knowledge. We like to believe that in the modern world, with all our technology and investigative tools, we can solve any mystery. We can track anyone. We can discover any truth. But Sneha's case reminds us that this isn't always so. Sometimes people disappear and are never found. Sometimes questions go unanswered. Sometimes the truth remains hidden, no matter how hard we search. This is a humbling realization. It forces us to confront the limits of our ability to understand and control the world. It reminds us that there are things we may never know, no matter how much we want to know them. For the families of the missing, this uncertainty is a particular kind of torture. They cannot grieve fully because they don't know what happened. They cannot move on because there is no closure. They exist in a perpetual state of not knowing, of hoping, of dreading. Sneha's family has dealt with this uncertainty by choosing to believe in the narrative that provides them the most comfort. They believe she died on September 11th, trying to help others. This belief may or may not be true, but it has allowed them to function, to honor her memory, to find some semblance of peace. There is wisdom in this approach. When the truth cannot be known, we must find ways to live with uncertainty. We must construct narratives that allow us to continue, that give meaning to loss, that provide comfort in the face of the unknowable. Whether Sneha Philip died a hero on September 11th, or was the victim of foul play, or took her own life, or somehow managed to disappear voluntarily, one thing is certain. She was a human being whose life mattered. She was a daughter, a wife, a doctor, a woman struggling with questions about her identity and her place in the world. She deserved a full life. She deserved answers to her questions. She deserved the chance to figure out who she wanted to be and to become that person. Instead, her story was cut short, leaving only questions behind. In the end, perhaps the most we can do is remember her. Remember that she existed. Remember that she was loved. Remember that her disappearance, whatever its cause, represents a loss that ripples outward, touching everyone who knew her and everyone who has heard her story. Sneha Ann Philip was 31 years old when she disappeared. She would be in her mid-50s today if she were still alive. We cannot know what kind of life she would have led, what she would have accomplished, what happiness she might have found. All we can do is wonder and remember and hope that someday, somehow, the truth about what happened to her will finally come to light. Until then, her name remains on the memorial at Ground Zero, etched in bronze alongside the names of nearly 3,000 others. Every year, on the anniversary of September 11th, her name is read aloud. Every day, visitors to the memorial pause at her name, perhaps wondering about her story, perhaps knowing that behind that name lies a mystery that has never been solved. That is Sneha's legacy. Not answers, but questions. Not certainty, but mystery. Not closure, but the eternal hope that someday the truth will be known. May she rest in peace, wherever she is. And may those who loved her find their own peace, even in the absence of answers. The story of Sneha Philip is ultimately a reminder of the fragility of life and the limits of human understanding. We want to believe that everything can be explained, that every mystery can be solved, that every question has an answer. But some mysteries resist resolution. Some questions remain forever open. In a world of surveillance cameras and digital records, of DNA analysis and forensic science, it seems impossible that someone could simply vanish. And yet, it happens. People disappear every day, leaving behind families who we spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened. Sneha was one of those people. Her disappearance was swallowed by the greatest tragedy of our time, becoming part of a story much larger than herself. She is remembered as a victim of September 11th, whether that is the truth or not. Her individual mystery has been absorbed into a collective tragedy. But for those who study her case, who examine the evidence, who try to piece together her final days, Sneha remains an individual. A complex, struggling, searching human being who deserved better than the fate she received, whatever that fate was. If you have any information about the disappearance of Sneha Ann Philip, no matter how insignificant it may seem, please contact the New York Police Department. Even after more than 2 decades, any information could help bring closure to her family and resolution to one of the most enduring mysteries of September 11th.